Morning, everyone. Once again, I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, which is always bad, but we'll try to keep it moving. All right, so welcome. This presentation is the Skilled Nursing Facility Quality Reporting Program Reports and Enhancements. And this is a new format for the session that we started in May, and it was really well received. We think that it's important that not only do you know how to use these reports to monitor MDS, more importantly, I think it's important that you're able to use them to drive quality improvement in your organizations. So there is a case study now that you all will work together as a group. As Bridget mentioned, there's a lot of additional handouts that are available. And really, I think if you are truly here as the idea of training the trainer, that you're going to go forth and train others when you leave here, this model, I think, works especially well for that. Thank you again to my CMS colleagues and my Econometrica colleagues for having me join them to present. And the files, if you are in the room, the files that we are using are on the left-hand side of your packet, along with everything for today. And again, I think they're numbers 6 through 10 are those additional handouts. So please find those and be prepared to use those at the end of this session. So as we go through the presentation, like all the others, we'll use lots of acronyms, and I'm sure you guys have your dinner conversation where you're like MDS, CMS, PPS, and your loved ones are like, what are they talking about? So you can provide that not only to your colleagues, but also hang it up on the fridge at home, that nice acronym list. And there is the second slide. So we do have some objectives here. At the close of this session, you will know how to locate these reports in the Certification and Survey Provider Enhanced Reports, or CASPER reporting application. How many of you are the folks in your facility who are charged with finding these reports and pulling them out? Okay, of those of you who raised your hand, who are the ones in charge of this, how many of you have a backup that can do it when you're gone? Okay, about half of the people that raised their hand. So one of the things I hope you'll all put on your to-do list is have a backup person to access these reports. Years ago, I went in to do some consulting, and I said, who's going to pull the reports for me? And they said, she's on vacation. And I said, what if she gets hit by the bus? She's the only one that knows how to do this? You've got to have a backup, right? So please make sure that you have that. And then you'll be able to summarize the data that are available on the QM reports, the provider threshold reports, and the review and correct reports. And you will be able to describe the purpose of the reports for the SNF QRP. And then ultimately, as I said, use those in a case study to perform a quality improvement analysis. So before we take a look at the reports, I am going to share with you how to access these reports in the CASPER reporting application. Before we do that, though, let's take a quick look at all of the reports that are available to nursing home providers and swing bed providers, and there really are quite a few of them. On this slide, we have a variety of reports for the nursing home-based SNFs, or SNFs, and they are in the nursing home provider report category. And I'm not going to read all these to you for sure, but I do just want to mention that as you look at these names, for instance, the activity report or the admission reentry, the actual names of those reports have MDS 3.0. So it would say MDS 3.0 activity, MDS 3.0 admission and reentry. And as you look at these reports, think about all the different reasons that you can use these. For instance, if you were looking at error fields by facility, you're able to look at that overall and say, what's going on in our facilities with trends? And again, we'll talk about that more later. And then keeping up with discharges. Are your discharge assessments up to date? I do want to mention this MDS 3.00003D/0004D package. This is a package that providers and corporate and third-party users are able to access with CASPER. But while the nursing home teams can access this, state agencies in CMS regional and central offices actually need to submit the reports separately. So if you are in one of the state agencies or in a regional office, you can't access this package like a provider can. You actually have to go in and pull those reports separately. Okay, and a few more nursing home provider reports. Again, these also start with MDS 3.0. It's a nice way to get your roster, your submission statistics, so you're really able to figure out what types of assessments you're submitting. And then all in its own category is the nursing home final validation report. And this report I hope that you use and you know and you love. This is the report that can say to you, here are my fatal errors, here are my warning messages, and what do we do with warning messages? Say, oh, thank goodness it was submitted and move on? No, what do? Research them, right? Now, you're able to find what those errors actually mean. There's some great references that can tell you what they mean and likely what you should do about them. And again, that's important information. And I'll share those references with you as we move ahead. We also have swing bed reports. So the swing bed report category, they do have that assessment print report, and then they also are able to access what errors they're having by their error report. And then again, the swing beds have that final validation report, just like the SNF-based providers. I do want to ask, are there any representatives from swing beds here today? Oh, okay. And then we have this submitter validation report, and that's available to nursing homes and swing beds based SNFs, and you're really able to use that report when things are really not going right from a submission standpoint, and you're able to find out more information about that. So as I said before, I'm sure many of you are familiar with how to access this system, but for the benefit of those who are relatively new to it or have never accessed this really provides a nice overview and gives you that information on how to access the reports. So you access these in the CASPER reporting application via the Welcome to CMS Systems for Providers page. And you select on that the CASPER reporting link, and you can see that circled in red. When you select that CASPER reporting link from that preceding website, you're connected to this KEYS National System Login for CASPER reporting page. On this page, the user enters the login information in the appropriate fields, selects the login button, and then responds appropriately to any security advisories or kind of pop-ups. Keep in mind that CMS allows a total of 2 users, individual users account per facility. It's essential that each facility has those 2 people designated. I already mentioned the importance of the backup. If the MDS coordinator holds all the cards and is the only one that can get into this, that's a problem. Make sure there are 2 users. And information on how to access this system is available on the KEYS Technical Support Office or QTSO webpage, where you can go to Access Forms and then select MDS Individual Access. So when you're requesting access to this system, it is 2 steps. It's a 2-step process. Step 1 is to use the CMS Net online registration application to request a CMS Net user ID. The second step then is to use the KEYS online user registration tool to obtain a KEYS submission ID. Again, more information about these steps is available on the QTSO website. And I should mention that the QTSO website was redone earlier this year. It is much more user-friendly than it was in the past. The website is QTSO, QTS like Sam, .cms.gov. And that is where you can find all of the manuals about that detail the reports, that give you all the information about accessing those reports. It's a super user-friendly website, particularly since that redesign. Oh, and I just realized I have not been advancing my, oh yes I did, sorry. Can we back up a slide there, guys? There we go, thanks. So after logging in, you'll come to the CASPER Topics page, which includes a list of related topic links in the Topics pane on the left. You can find more information about each of these topics in the CASPER Reporting MDS Provider Users Guide. So when you go to that QTSO website, that's the guide you're going to look for. The link to that is in the last slide. So again, it's the CASPER Reporting MDS Provider Users Guide. The main body of the CASPER Topics page is in the home page pane. And the home page pane includes that welcome to CASPER greeting and then links to the functionality that are available within the system. The links and descriptions of these functions they provide are included, again, they're in that center welcome to CASPER page. And there you can see, for example, when you see logout, it tells you what it does. It says it ends the session. So each one of those links has kind of a description of what they do. So you'll click on the button there that says Reports, and again, you can see that on the top. So on this page, you can either click across the top or down the side in order to access those reports. And then the Reports category on the pane, once you click on Reports, it lists the various report categories that are available to users. Some of the reports are restricted to specific users or user groups, so everybody who can access this site may not see what we see here today on this slide. The pane on the right lists the reports available, again, in the selected report category. And this list may span multiple pages. So you can see on the bottom there's a 1 and 2. You may have to click through to get to a different pages to actually navigate from one to another. Then to request that specific report, you click on the abbreviated name of it. That is the black underlined links there. In the example here, you can see the user has selected the MDS 3.0 Nursing Home Provider Reports, and you can see that there's 2 pages available in that pane on the right. It's important to note that as users work through this system, they shouldn't use the back and forward buttons on their browser, but actually click through this system in order to make changes. So don't be tempted to kind of use the back button on your keyboard. So once the user's chosen the report category, they can then choose the report that they'd like to access. To request a specific report, click the abbreviated report name, displayed again black underline link, and you can see here in the red box that we've picked the MDS 3.0 assessments with error number XXX. Then you'll specify the report criteria for the dates. So with this particular report that we've chosen, the error report, the user needs to choose the date range and the error number. So each report may have different criteria that you need to choose. You can see in our example that we've chosen from June 2015 through October 31st, 2015, and we've chosen a particular error number, 3810A. The criteria choices presented in this report vary, again, depending on the report, depending on the levels of access that an individual has. And in that CASPER Reporting MDS 3.0 Providers Users Guide is where you can find more information about those individual criteria. Once you submit that report request, you are going to receive verification that that report request job has been put into queue. Keep in mind that some of these reports have tons of information, and as such, they may take a while to run. So once you request it, it's usually a pretty good idea to close out of the system, let the report run, and then come back and get that at another time. And here is the report result that we chose on the previous slide. And again, you can see the error number and the date range. With this report, again, accessing these reports, that was kind of a quick run through of that. All of this information is in Section 2 of that CASPER Reporting Users Guide that I mentioned. So Section 2 is where you want to find the info, and there are nice screenshots and stuff in there to help you. So let's take a look at just 3 of the reports available in the Nursing Home Provider Report category. Specifically, we'll look at the MDS 3.0 Activity Report, the MDS 3.0 Assessments with Error Number XXXX, and the nursing home, the MDS 3.0 nursing home assessment print. Keep in mind that in your CASPER reports are going to be kept in your folders for 60 days. After those 60 days, those folders are automatically purged from the system, okay? So let's start with the MDS 3.0 activity report. The MDS 3.0 activity report reports the accepted assessments, tracking records, and inactivation requests that have been submitted by or on behalf of a facility during a specified time period. This report includes many data elements from the assessment and tracking records that were submitted within that time frame. For example, it includes a variety of information from Section A, including the reason for assessment info, target dates, submission dates, and then certain other information. And providers can use this report to ensure that all of their assessments and tracking systems have been accepted into the system. Next, we have the MDS 3.0 Assessments with Error Number report. How many of you use this report on a regular basis? All three? Oh, 4 of you. So let me please give you a plea to use this report on a regular basis to find out what's going on with the MDS system. So I often will have administrators say to me, I have a good MDS coordinator. And what do you think my question to them is? How do you know? And they say, well, we got paid. And I said, well, did you get audited? Because that'd be the kicker, right? But this is one of those ways that you can say, how is our system going? Where are we making mistakes? Where are we late? Are we on time? You know, if I'm the MDS coordinator, the administrator says, how's everything going? What's my answer? Great, right? So this is a way that we can really double check. Are things going great? So let's look at this report in a little detail. This report lists the assessments submitted during that specified time frame with a particular error. So with the date criteria, you're going to select the from, and then the through dates are going to be fixed on this. So users need to request at least one, and I'll tell you more about the dates in a minute. Users must request at least one error message, but you can request up to 5. And what will happen then is those 5 errors will be all compiled into one report, but kind of by section. Again, with this report, you're able to track the particular assessments, particular errors that are happening really on a facility-wide basis. So if you think about a resident-level quality measure report, you could liken that to a final validation report, right? It tells you a one-time snapshot of what happened, what errors were. Where this is more like a facility-level quality measure report. This tells you what errors are going on across that facility. So the error report here, we've given an example, a few numbers, and again, I'm not going to read you those numbers, but these are what you could use to monitor assessment completion, submission, timeliness. So these are all about timeliness. So these, again, I can't stress enough how useful these are with your quality improvement. And next is the nursing home assessment print. This report details the most recent assessment items submitted for a select assessment ID. And the assessment ID is an internal identifier that the MDS submission system assigns to a resident's record or a resident's assessment. The criteria selection for this presents an opportunity for you to put in that assessment ID. And this report allows you to view the item responses for that particular MDS item in that accepted assessment. Again, it's an easy way to take a look at the assessments and verify that the correct information is in there. So here's my first polling question for you guys. Which MDS 3.0 CASPER report allows you to view the item responses for each item for an accepted MDS assessment? Is it A, the error detail by facility report? Is it B, assessments with error number XXX report? Is it the nursing home assessment print? Or is it the nursing home final validation report? So we're looking for the responses for each item in accepted MDS. We'll give you just a few moments here to participate in the poll. And what percentage of the polls do you need to participate in to get a certificate of completion? 80. Ooh, you guys were listening to Bridget. Good. All right, I think we've got a pretty good number there. Let's take a look. The answer is C, the nursing home assessment print report, and that's where users can take a look at every response for a given item. Okay, let's move on and talk about confidential feedback reports. There are several available to providers, including the SNF QRP QM reports, the review and correct report, provider preview report, and provider threshold report. There is a document that I want to mention that we don't have listed as a reference, and that is the SNF QRP requirements for fiscal year, or FY 2021 program year. So that's a catchy name for a document, I know. SNF QRP requirements for the fiscal year 2021 program year. That is a fact sheet that is available. It is outstanding. It is a super reference to learn more about these reports, and if you want to share with your colleagues more about that. So check that out. It is really good descriptions. And you can find that resource on the SNF QRP data submission deadline webpage. So keep in mind with the SNF QRP, there's the main webpage and lots of sub-web pages, and take advantage of those. Additionally, I want to mention section 13 of the SNF QRP program of the CASPER Reporting Users Guide, so section 13. This was updated in March, so make sure that you do have the most up-to-date copy of that newly updated resource. Guys, I think my clicker's not working again. There we go. So Alice reviewed these slides, but for the benefit of those who are just watching this module, I just want to mention it very quickly. We did start the data collection of the 6 new measures on October 1st of last year. They were added to the review and correct reports in the spring, and they will be added to the QM reports in fall of 2019, somewhere around October 1st. And then these will be in the provider preview reports next summer, and then next fall, the measures will be displayed. So what are the 6 measures that are included here? It's a drug regimen review measure, and then the changes in skin integrity, the post-acute care, pressure ulcer injury, application of the IRF functional outcome measure, the change in self-care, the change in mobility score, the medical change in discharge self-care, and discharge mobility scores. So those 6 measures will be displayed next fall. So where are we going to get these measures? These reports, they are accessed via the CASPER Reports page. To access the SNF QRP reports, users will start where they did to access those other CASPER reports. And once they select the Reports tab, they'll again be brought to the CASPER Reports page. From the CASPER Reports page, you can see the link to the SNF Quality Reporting Program in the Reports category on the left, on that left-hand frame. So you'll select that, and remember, only those reports to which you have access are going to be available when you click there. When you select that desired underlined report name from those in the right-hand pane, the CASPER Report Submit page is presented, providing criteria options with which you can specify the information to include. And these options may differ for each report. I mentioned that earlier. And again, like the CASPER reports, these can take a while to load, so it may be best to request them and then walk away from the system. So let's look now at the SNF QRP QM reports. There are resident level and facility level reports. And for me as a nurse and someone who's really interested in quality improvement, I love these reports. So these reports are are available on demand prior to public reporting of the measures, and providers can specify the reporting period of their choice and obtain aggregate performance data for the current and past 3 quarters. Keep in mind that depending on the report you run, the current quarter may only have partial data. As I mentioned, there's 2 different types of reports, the resident level QM report and the facility level QM report. The resident level report only contains assessment-based quality measures, so you aren't going to find claims-based data there. But the facility level report does include both claims and assessment-based data. These reports provide a snapshot of performance data for quality improvement purposes based on what you guys have submitted as a facility. The assessment-based reports are refreshed monthly, and the claims-based data, assessment-based data are refreshed monthly, and the claims-based data are refreshed annually. One important thing to note about this report is that these in the review and correct reports don't match per se. And the reason is they're not static. These things are updated on different timelines. The review and correct reports are updated weekly, whereas the QM reports are going to be updated on a monthly basis. Additionally, the review and correct reports are not risk adjusted, but the QM reports are risk adjusted. So often folks will say, well, I'm looking at the same facility and the same reporting time. Why is this not matching? And that's the reason, is the different risk adjustments, the different refresh times and things. And that's why you need those manuals to help you understand that. Okay, after selecting that SNF QRP link from the reports category on the left, a list of those reports will come up on the right. And again, to access the facility level QM report, you just select that from that pane. Frozen again. There we go. In this screen, the user can identify the time frame. So the begin and end date values define the date range of the measures. The drop-down list is provided at the end, and then the default value of that end date is going to be the most recent fully calculated quarter. But you can select a different quarter from the list. And the begin date is a read-only field. So when you're selecting dates, it's automatically going to give you that 12-month period. But it's going to vary based on what you put in on that bottom. So you can't change the top. That's going to automatically populate. And here's an example of a facility-level QM report. The screenshot shows assessment-based measures. You can see that for each measure, the SNF QRP facility-level report shows the number of residents in the numerator and the denominator. It also shows the facility's performance on the QM and the national average for QM comparisons. Users may wish to use this report in conjunction with their MDS 3.0 facility level QM report. So remember, there's another QM, that report that's available for all of those other measures. And there you're able actually to see how you compare not only federally, but against others in your state. With this, this report will help you to identify areas on which you may want to focus for quality improvement. And then you're able to, again, identify here numerator, denominator. So how many residents flag, how many residents could have potentially flagged. And keep in mind, based on all of those measure specifications, that the number of residents in your denominator is going to vary. Sometimes folks are going to be excluded. Sometimes there'll be, different residents selected for different groups. A common question I would get when I would work with facilities is why do I have so many in the denominator for this one, but less in this one, even though I have the same reporting period for facilities. So it goes back to those measure specs and understanding who's eligible to be included in the QM, then figuring out who's actually flagging for it. And here's another example of a facility-level QM report. And this example is for a claims-based measure. I particularly like the information on the right-hand column of this measure. You can see whether the skilled nursing facility that is in that report, so your facility, if this is what you're looking at, how you compare to the national benchmark, whether you're better than the national average, about average, so no different than the national rate, or worse than. And here in our example, our facility is better than the national average. The section I want to refer to you that details this report of that manual is section 13. So if you have questions about this QM report, again, section 13. If you have questions about who's included, that's when you go to the QM user's manual where you actually get the data specifications. And next we go to the SNF resident level quality measure report. Again, the user will select the link from the list in the right-hand frame. And again, they will select the time frame. Again, the begin date is read-only. You can see by the little arrow in the drop down there that they're going to be able to move that end date. And here's an example of the resident level QM report. Remember that claims-based QMs are not going to be included in this report on the resident level. And this report tells the user whether or not particular residents triggered in certain measures. So a trigger is signified by an X. And then for certain measures, you'll see the residents have NT if they're not triggered. And if residents were excluded, so for some reason they weren't eligible to be included in the denominator, then they're going to have an E. A common question that the SNF QRP help desk gets about this report is, do I want to have an X or don't I want to have an X? And what's the answer to that question? It depends on the QM, right? So if I'm looking at my the application of the functional care, the assessment of function and a care plan to address function measure, X is good. Right? I want them to trigger because that means I did what I was supposed to do with that. But if I have pressure ulcers or falls, I don't want X's, right? So it's important to understand. I think it's also important to understand when a resident is excluded, to understand why. Years ago, I was working in a facility as a consultant, and we had their denominator for a particular QM was very, very small. And they said, I don't understand why that is. And I said, let's look at the exclusions. And the exclusion for the particular measure was dependence on different mobility, including whether they were pushed, they had any mobility out in the hallway, whether they participated at all. So this facility had a lot of alert-oriented and functionally capable residents who were capable of moving themselves. However, it was a very fancy facility, and you often have residents who don't understand how to do an ADL, right? So you help them, or they physically can't have an ADL, or they're there to be served, right? And say to you, I want you to do this. So the issue was, these residents were capable of pushing themselves, but said, I'm paying you to do this for me. You take me to the dining room. So they literally never had mobility, participated in mobility outside of their room. That carved them out of the particular QM. And that made that facility's denominator really small, and that means anybody who triggered drove up their rate. So it's understanding those kinds of intricacies. If you look here and you say, wow, we have all these residents excluded, why? Going back to those reports and understanding the specs and figuring it out, right? Isn't this fun? You can tell that I like this stuff a lot. So let's look at the review and correct report. This report allows you to review facilities to review their QM data to identify if any corrections or changes are necessary prior to the quarter's data submission deadline. And that's about 4.5 months after the end of a quarter. This report also is a user-requested on-demand report, and it includes assessment-based resident-level and facility-level QM performance data. This report provides a breakdown by measure and by quarter of the provider's QM results for 4 rolling quarters. And providers can specify the reporting period of their choice, and obtain this, again, aggregate report for the current and the past 3 quarters. The facilities measure scores here are not risk adjusted, and that is a key point. It is only going to include the observed scores. And what are observed scores? That's what this based on your raw MDS data. Providers can use this report in conjunction with their other QRP or CASPER reports, such as the final validation report or the resident level QM report, to determine if there's any reporting errors that may affect your QM performance. Please note that the review and correct report does not indicate compliance information for your APU. These reports are available for providers to run with updated weekly data until that data correction deadline. So once that deadline is passed, these reports are going to be, that quarter is going to be frozen. But then again, the next week, that newer data is going to be updated. There were some new features added to the review and correct reports this year, and the addition of resident level data, I think, is a great one, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. Like the other SNF QRP reports, you just select the link from the right-hand frame. Then you have the begin date, the end date, the quality measures, and you have that little checkbox of whether you want to include the resident level data. Again, the user can select the end date, and the begin date will be the first quarter of the four-quarter rolling reporting period. And again, like I said, you can include that resident data, resident level. All the measures are selected by default on this, so you can see it's all blue there in the select. But if you choose, you only want particular measures for some reason, you can press and hold the control and/or shift keys on that keyboard in order to click and select on multiple, either a single or multiple measures. You can, in addition to getting that resident level data, you can request a comma-separated values report. And someone probably knows what that means, but it is not me. We'll ask our tech folks what that type of report is. All right, and just a reminder of the data submission deadlines. The final submission deadlines for the SNF QRP are based on quarterly data collection timeframes. And all the MDS data must be finalized prior to the submission deadline. You can see that the first quarter of the year, the final submission deadline is August 15th. For the second quarter, it's November 15th. For quarter 3, which is July 1st through September 30th, it's February 15th. And then October 1st to December 31st, the fourth quarter is May 15. And note that with submission dates, if they fall on a weekend or a major U.S. federal holiday, they're automatically accept the provider submissions up through midnight the following business day. For the Q4 2018 end date and prior, only 3 measures were reported, and that's the short stay pressure ulcer, the application of falls, and the application of functional assessment with the care plan. However, for the first quarter of 2019 and going forward, the measures that are presented on this slide are reported, and that's the pressure ulcer short stay, the application of falls, the application of functional assessment and care plan, and the drug regimen review. Effective with the fourth quarter of this year and then going forward, this pressure ulcer measure that's listed here will no longer be reported. Instead, it will be the changes in skin integrity, the post-acute care pressure ulcer injury, and then the 4 outcomes measures there are listed as well. Okay, notice the format of the report has changed. With the sections of the report, the facility level and the resident level, I'll talk about each of these sections a bit as we go through the next slide. Next slides, I do want to point out to you the trigger legend on the top. You can see there that the dash means the data are not provided or not applicable. The X is trigger, NT is not triggered, and again, E is excluded from the measure based on those exclusion criteria. And here's an example just focusing on the facility level data. On the report, you can see the headers across the top. First, on the very top of the report is the QM name. In this sample, it's our pressure ulcer measure. And then underneath, you'll see that table legend I just mentioned, and then the headers for each section. We've got the quarter, the CMS IDs, start and end dates, the data correction deadline. Then you can see whether it's open or closed. And you can see we've got one open quarter. We've got no residents that are triggering the measures here, so making their facility percent 0. So what if you notice here that someone is triggered? What do we do with this? What do you think? Figure out who, right? Who is triggered? Why are they triggered? And investigate. Make sure that your data are correct. Or maybe you look here and there's a whole bunch of, there's only a few SNF stays, but you know you've had a lot more than that. Again, it's using this as a trigger to say, does this look right? Does this look like it's our facility? And figuring that out. And you probably noticed on the first slide when I talked about the review and correct report that there are additions. And those additions are the facility level data, the resident level data has now been added, which to me is a great addition. Additionally, there's some enhanced sorting and filtering features that were added. Specifically now you're able to sort resident level data by the resident last name, resident ID, and resident status. And you also can filter by individual QMs. And here's an example of the resident level data. You'll see the headers across the top there where it gives you some information about that resident, their admission and discharge date, their data correction, again, the deadline, whether it's opened and whether or not that resident triggered. So here on the right-hand column, we have all NTs, none of our residents triggered. If they did, they would have an X there. Or if they were excluded, we would note that as well. And here's an example of what that entire report looks like with the recent enhancements. You can see those facility data are presented, and as we're used to seeing, but then also on the bottom, we now have that resident level. So great addition to this report. So time for a polling question. The review and correct reports contain resident level data for each QM. Is this true or false? Give you just a moment to answer that poll. Thank you guys for participating with the Slido. Hopefully it keeps you awake and engaged and moving along. Although I did hear someone's alarm go off a little while ago. I thought, geez, they set an alarm to wake up during my presentation. I've been insulted before, but I have had someone knit during my presentation once. They told me it kept her awake. Anyway, I think it's time to close this poll and see how everybody did. Yeah, that is true. Great, thanks again. Time for another poll. The next poll is a fill-in-the-blank question. QM calculations for the review and correct reports are performed on a blank basis. Are these reports calculated weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or annually? Take just a few more moments and go ahead and enter your answer. There's that alarm again. Who is that? Guys, I'm getting a complex with all the alarms going off. All right, I think we can go ahead and close that poll. And the right answer is weekly. So these are calculated on a weekly basis. Next, let's look at the provider preview report. These are available about 5 months after the end of each data collection quarter. Remember, corrections need to be made prior to the applicable quarterly data submission deadline or the freeze date. So by the time these provider previews provider preview reports come out, it's too late for you to go back in and correct MDSs. So why are these made available, when and why? These reports were made available starting in summer of 2018. And the idea of this is that providers are given the opportunity before the public to review that facility level QM data, and it is 30 days prior to the public release of those data. The report displays assessment-based and claims-based measures. Provider preview reports are refreshed quarterly. They're automatically generated and saved into the provider's shared folder. So unlike the other reports that we've talked about that are on-demand reports, these are pushed out to you guys automatically. So again, I want to stress that these are not available till about 5 months after the end of the reporting quarter. So if you're waiting for these and then starting to look at your data, you've missed the boat. Providers do, though, have that 30-day period prior to public reporting, beginning on the dates the reports are issued, to review your data prior to it being made available to the public on Nursing Home Compare. So again, I mentioned you can't correct the data to this. However, you can request a CMS review if you believe your data scores are displayed inaccurately. So it's not that it's inaccurate because you messed up the MDS, it's that it's inaccurate based on what you believe your MDS data show. And where do you get these? These are accessed via shared folder. Shared folders in the CASPER system are identified by that asterisk. A shared folder name begins with a 2-letter state abbreviation, so MS in this case. Then you select the long-term care or LTC folder. You don't notice that the long-term care below it says LTC VR. That's that validation report folder. You're not going there, you're going to just LTC. And then you'll select the SNF QRP Provider Preview Report. So during the 30-day preview period, SNFs can request CMS review of the data contained within their provider preview report should they believe it's inaccurate, and that's whether the quality metric or the denominator, you say based on what we know our data should look like, this doesn't represent us. So again, if your errors in this result from inaccurate coding, that is not, those errors cannot be corrected. CMS will not consider correcting quality measure calculations that the SNFs find to be inaccurate based on inaccurate data submission. And again, this is because there is that freeze, that data submission deadline, that quarterly freeze date. So by the time these are generated, again, you can't make corrections. So what do we do to prevent errors that we find at this rate? We use those review and correct reports, use those quality measure reports to look at those data ahead of those freeze dates. And here's a good example of provider preview report. These reports show the users what the data is going to look like on Nursing Home Compare after the upcoming Nursing Home Compare refresh. The first example shows the facility performance on the assessment-based measures. You can see here you have the measure name and the measure number, as well as the number of SNF stays included in the numerator and denominator, as well as the facility's observed percent, adjusted percent. Does every measure have an adjusted percent? No. Why is that? They don't all have risk adjusters, right? They don't all have covariates, right? And you'll also see the national average. This summer, there's been some minor changes to how the reporting period appears. So now the reporting period dates are actually going to be with each measure, so it should make it kind of easier to eyeball on an individual measure, kind of increase the user friendliness of these reports for facilities. And here's another example of the provider preview report. This second example shows facility performance on claims-based measures. These reports tell how many SNFs perform better than, no different than, or worse than the national average, as well as how many SNFs have too few cases for public reporting, along with that facility's own results. And then we come to the provider threshold report. This report details the status of measures required for the annual payment update, or APU, by the fiscal year of the APU. The provider threshold is a newer report. It was made available in January of this year. These are on-demand reports where the facility can specify the reporting period of interest. For each assessment-based measure, the report will display the percentage of resident assessments that met the data completion threshold, the number of successfully submitted resident assessments, and the number of resident assessments, again, that met that threshold. The report will display these data points for each quality measure by year, by quarter, and by month. To access this report, again, you select it from the list on the right-hand frame of the SNF QRP reports. And then you select your desired fiscal year. The drop-down list contains the current APU fiscal year for which measured data collection has begun and one prior APU fiscal year. So there's a couple of limitations, and this slide and this discussion is probably the thing I get the most questions about at this presentation. So I'd love to, if you have, we can't really take questions, but if you give me that look like what you just said made absolutely no sense, I'll try to say it another way. Again, there are a couple of limitations that we want you to be aware of. You might remember that compliance for the SNF QRP is not calculated by measure. It's calculated by assessment. So how many assessments are compliant with the data element submission requirements? For each assessment, you need to submit all the required data elements for all the required measures to receive credit for that assessment for your APU. Then the provider threshold report doesn't display the total number of assessments that met the compliance requirements. Instead, it displays compliance by measure. So when you look at the data elements that are designated as the standardized patient assessment data elements, or SPADE items for post-acute care settings, they are used to risk adjust some of our measures. So remember, some of the quality measures are risk adjusted based on other MDS items. So these are used as part of the SNF QRP, and they are part of the data submission elements. So for purposes of determining compliance by assessment, each assessment has to have all the required things that go into forming the numerator of that item. They also have to have all of the risk assessment items, okay? So if you have 100 assessments, they're looking, that is how many assessments are being examined for, how is your compliance? So all of this means is that you can't look at this report and say, am I compliant with the SNF QRP? You can look at this report to identify which measures you may have some trouble with. And we'll look at the sample of report and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And there we go. So if we're looking at this provider threshold report, you can see, again, compliance by measure. We've got the calendar year, we've got the particular measure that's being addressed, and we're looking at that compliance. So we're, for purposes of calculating that APU compliance, it's not determined at the measure level. Instead, it is determined at the assessment level. So here, what am I going to use this report for then? I want to look and say, are there any assessments in any category where I'm not compliant with? These are the main items that are triggering those QMs, basically, right? These are your, the main data. It's those risk adjustments that aren't there. But why can't I look at, if I'm at my percentage of resident assessment meeting the data threshold, what if I look at this across all of these measures and they're all at 90%? Am I compliant? How many say absolutely? What if I'm at 95% across all measures? Am I compliant? Some people are saying yes. How many say no? How many say I can't tell from this report? Can't tell. Keep in mind that I may have missed the pressure ulcer data on Jen's assessment. I may have missed the fall data on Susie's assessment. I may have missed some other data on some other guy's assessment. So when I look at the assessment level, when I look at the measure level, I just know that I'm having problems with that particular measure, but I don't know whose assessments are on. I cannot add this up and look across the board and say, I'm in great shape. Can I look across the board and say I'm at 100%, I'm feeling pretty good, I'm still gonna look a little further? Probably. But again, 100% on this does not automatically mean 100% compliance. Why? Because the covariates aren't displayed on this, okay? The risk adjustments are not going to be displayed here. Those are, again, you're gonna use those other reports, use those other submission. Does that make sense? I don't see like deer in headlights look, I'm thinking pretty. He's saying if there's 100%, there is no risk. The 100% is what? That you've been compliant submitting everything for the numerator and denominator of, say, your pressure ulcer measure. It doesn't say that it's 100% of you've submitted the risk adjusters with that. It's saying you have submitted the main data for that QM. Okay? Y'all good with that? So you can, the bottom line is do not look at this report and say, hey, we got it going on, we're good to go. Okay, that's the bottom line. Is everybody good with that? Guys, look at you're like, yeah.
Is there a report that looks at the covariates?
The question that somebody just asked, is there a report that looks at covariates? What do you think? Where could I find that info? I could look at my assessment print, but there's nothing that prints out and says, here is all your covariate data. So here's a question. Do I look at these reports and say, I look great on this, I don't ever need to audit MDSs to verify their accuracy? No. How do I know if my covariate data are being submitted? I audit some MDSs and I check it out, right? If you don't audit, and who's the worst person to audit the MDSs? The MDS coordinator, right? It's like when I dust my house, it looks great. My mom comes in, she's like, you missed a cobweb there, honey, right? You don't want the person who's doing the work checking their work. Because I did it, it's like when I review a PowerPoint, I don't find my spelling errors, my buddies find my spelling errors. Do not have the MDS coordinator review his or her own work, right? Someone else can do that for them. Does that make sense? But that's how you find it. No more questions till, you and I are not having a private conversation here. All right. So, how am I doing for time? Ooh, I got to get moving. So for each assessment, another slide-o, for each assessment-based measure, the provider threshold report displays which of the following. Does it have the compliance calculations for each measure, the percentage of resident assessments meeting the data completion threshold, or the total number of assessments that meet the compliance requirement? And take just a couple of moments to answer that question. Give you just a moment or two more. Again, thanks for engaging in the polling. All right, let's see how we did. And the correct answer is B. I hope that I have instilled this idea in you. That is the percentage of resident assessments meeting that threshold, not the overall compliance. It's time to have some fun, guys. It's a case study. Let's practice using the SNF QM reports for analysis and quality improvement. Please gather your handouts for the case study. It will be the SNF QRP Reports Activity Worksheet, the SNF QRP Facility Level QM Report, the SNF QRP Resident Level QM Report, and we have 3 MDS 3.0 Nursing Home Assessment Print Reports. And they should, if you are accessing those electronically, they should show up as one single file. So here is our scenario. You are the Quality Improvement Director at Sunny Valley Nursing Center. We never have Stormy Times Nursing Center, right? Sunny Valley. Your role involves routinely accessing, analyzing, and using CASPER reports to support your work of the facility's Quality Improvement Program, or QAPI program. On a regular basis, you run the reports. You run review and correct reports to validate the accuracy of your MDS submissions. And that allows you to see any potential errors that you want to correct during that correction period. Once a QM report is updated with Q4 data that are available, again, beginning January 1st, 2019, you review and analyze your SNF QRP facility and resident level data. While reviewing these reports, you identify an opportunity for improvement. So here's your charge. Working in groups at your table, identify and analyze the opportunities for improvement using the sample CASPER reports provided. I hope that those of you who are participating remotely will take part in this and then come back and debrief with us as well. Use the worksheet to guide your review and analysis, and again, that's labeled SNF QRP Reports Activity Worksheet. We are going to debrief in more like 15-ish minutes, like between 15 and 18 or so minutes. So we have at least 5 minutes for debrief. Actually, yeah, 15, let's do that, even though it says 20. If we still need a few minutes once we get to 15, I'll give you more time, but I want to have some time for discussion. All right, guys, talk amongst yourselves. Have fun with this. So here are the 4 questions that you all were charged with answering, steps. So you review those SNF QRP reports, the facility level, and identify which measure or measures you should target, and how does the report data support your conclusion. Then we wanted you to identify the residents triggered in the numerator, and then using the assessment print, figure out what made those folks trigger. And then how will you go ahead and identify to use these data for next steps in your quality improvement plan. So let's look kind of quickly at the reports, but then spend a few minutes talking about process of using these. Oops. So the SNF QRP facility level QM report helps you to identify which measure or measures your facility should target for improvement. And here we can see our facility observed percent is 4.5, and their adjusted percent is 3.9. So again, they're higher than the national average. But I want to stress here that an elevated percent is indicative of a likely problem or a likely issue opportunity. But the opposite is not necessarily true. So if I look at this and I'm right, let's say I look at the UTI measure and I'm right on line with the national average, but when I look at the resident level data, I realize they're all clustered on one unit, I have a problem, right? And similarly, if I look at the falls and I say, well, my fall rate is right in line with the national average, but one resident has had, or a couple of your residents have had 25 falls this month, you probably have a problem. So you can't look at these numbers and say, hey, we're good with everything based on these alone. It's all about checks and balances. You certainly can look at this and say, we're worse in these 2 areas than the nation and then everybody in our state. We probably want to examine these first. Does it necessarily mean you need to do something different with quality? It may or may not. You may have different resident characteristics or different things going on. So you can't look at these and say, we definitely have a problem. I will tell you in all my years consulting with facilities, I could take resident level QM reports and pick out the residents that I thought I would want to focus on when I got to their facility, and then I'd sit across from the DON and say, who are you worried about on survey? And dollars to donuts, they would be the same people on my list. So these are not a perfect indicator of their problem, but they're a pretty good source. All right, and then we wanted you to find the 3 residents that were included in the numerator, and they are David Hoppin, Brian Jones, and Tamara Wilkins. And these have the X alongside them. And you'll see that in our sample there on the next slide. Remember, NT not triggered, X is triggered, E is excluded. So, and there's Brian, or Mr. Jones, and there's Ms. Wilkins. Next, you can use your MDS assessment print to summarize the findings for each resident. The data elements that triggered the measure are highlighted in yellow on this slide. So you can see Mr. Hoppin's information here. He had 2 stage 4s. Neither of these were present on entry or re-entry. You can see the 2 and the 0 there. This slide, I think, is a good reminder that QMs are flagging residents. They're not flagging issues for residents. So if I look at the falls as the great example. I've got 10 residents fall, but every one of those has many, many falls. And remember, it only shows as one guy on your report, one resident. The same is true here. Even though Mr. Hoppin had 2 pressure ulcers get worse on your watch, he only shows up as 1 resident. So it's really looking beyond the data. If I have 3 residents that have multiple pressure areas on my watch versus 3 residents who have 1 on my watch, which represents a bigger issue for quality improvement potentially, right? So it's really understanding the details in the data. And then Mr. Jones, he has 1 stage 2. If he had 1 stage 1, would it be flagged in here in this measure? No, right, because it's the 2s, 3s, 4s, and unstageables. And then Ms. Wilkins, she has 2 stage 4s, and she also has a DTI that was not present on admission. So here's the million-dollar question. We've found out all of this information about our residents. What do you do now to inform the next steps of the development of that performance improvement plan? The first is investigate the accuracy of the data. Wouldn't it be great if you had an MDS coding issue and not a pressure ulcer issue? Probably not that lucky, but it's worth a look. And then you identify whether the residents are clustered on all one unit. I mentioned that before. So if I'm thinking about identifying root cause here, right, I've got to know who are these people? Where do they live in my facility? What's changed on that unit if they're all clustered on one? I also want to take a look and say, are there related triggers? And I think we fall down on that a lot of times. If I've got pressure areas, do I also have residents with mobility changes? Do I have falls and psych meds on the same residents? I'm looking at that potential cause. I'm saying what is really going these related areas. And if I see a resident who's maybe had weight loss and they've got hydration issues and they've got pressure areas and maybe they've had a decline in their late loss ADLs, maybe they need more help with eating, I'm worried about that's a whole system issue, right? Something's fallen down in the system there. And then you're going to look at care. So we're going out and saying, are our policies and procedures followed? If someone follows our policies and procedures, will we get the results we want? Are they evidence-based? Earlier this year, I was presenting on pain, evidence-based pain at a conference in Florida. And I asked, on what evidence do you base your pain protocols? The silence was deafening. No one in the room knew on what evidence they based the care for their residents. And I will tell you that's not a unique experience. So are your policies and procedures evidence-based? Sometimes I'll say, can I see your pressure ulcer policy? And it's this thick. Who can follow that, right? It becomes too cumbersome. And then you provide education to the staff as necessary, but I would say all too often, whether it's plans of correction, whether it's quality improvement plans, we skip all of this and re-educate folks on the same policy that hasn't been working for us for years, right? We need to go back and examine the care. What are they supposed to do and go with that. And finally, I want to leave you with some resources. Please use those CASPER manuals. The Reporting User's Guide is really invaluable, and that QM manual, and that fact sheet as well. Here's your lesson summary. Hopefully you're able now to find the reports, and you know about the data that are included in those, the purpose of those reports, as well as how to use them in a case study or quality improvement situation. And with that, I want to invite you to, 1, write down some ideas in your action plan, and 2, think about all of those reports that I listed, and what is one that you have not yet used that you think might be a great opportunity to use in your facility for quality improvement, or maybe you want to just find out more about it. And finally, Please go ahead and submit any questions we have to Slido. I want to thank you guys for your time and attention and sticking with me. Thank you. And Bridget's here with some announcements, I think.